Good evening, good evening, good evening. God bless you. Welcome to Let's Spark Some Conversation, Season 1, Episode 1. I am so excited about what is going to take place on tonight. So thank you all for you being out there joining us on tonight. Please share this if you can. Share it with someone, even after it is over, because I believe that it is going to bless someone. Tonight's episode is about identity versus the roles of women. We are in Women's History Month, and I think that this is an opportune topic to truly discuss. Now, before we even get into tonight's episode, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Let's Spark Some Conversation. Now, this is something that is God-breathed, God-birthed. He truly had to bring it to me to say, listen, I need you to have some conversation around some topics. I need you to have some conversation around some things, because we are in a dispensation. We're in a time that we need to converse. We need to truly have communication one with another. Some things are lost in translation. Some things are just, left by the wayside. And we just feel like, hey, the other person know what's going on. But we have to communicate one with another. So this forum has been birth, in this season to truly offer transparency. I believe in the 5-point structure that we have: transparency, offering hope and healing, right? Being able to restore ourselves, also others, and having an overcomer's mindset, how we view things. What is our perspective? How are we thinking concerning matters? Because believe it or not, sometimes we are stuck in situations based off of what it is that we're thinking. And then we want to get to the place of pure wellness to see God in every area of our lives. So before I introduced my guest co-host, I just want to say this woman is truly a sister to me. I love her so much. They call her, bombshell. Like, in a nutshell, she is an amazing woman. You saw the introduction. I met her through Shore Life, Shore Vineyard, and we connected. I love her personality. I love her drive. I love her heart towards the things of God. And tonight, you're in for a treat. And so I want you to receive my sister, a lover of God, a lover of the Word of God, Michelle Rodrick.
Good evening, Annette.
Hi, Michelle.
Good evening, ladies. I'm great. How are you? I'm excited.
I am doing well. Okay, are you able to hear me? Someone said that they weren't able to hear me. Are you able to hear me now? Because I want to make sure that you hear everything that is going to happen in our conversation on tonight. And it's going to be like two sisters, two friends. There's no formalism here to say, hey, we're going to do it this way or that way. Because when you're engaged in conversation, it is truly authentic conversation. Can I agree with that?
Yes.
And so I like to say that Michelle and I, we have great chemistry, when we are conversing one with another. But I want to start off, Michelle, with this topic of identity versus the roles of women. I want to first ask the question, like, what is identity? Because a lot of times, people don't know what identity is to even verse it to anything.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that I know that a lot of what we'll be breaking down tonight and talking about tonight is really the difference between identity and roles, and functions and expressions of identity versus identity itself. And I mean, one really powerful thing that I think about when I think of the Lord and when I think of worship and when I think of identity, he's the source of our identity. And if we're taking identity from him, worship is agreement with who God is. And that is, agreement is really critical with knowing who we are and being able to fully agree with that, and what that how that really translates, like into real life. Agreement with identity and pulling our source, who we are, spirit, soul. I mean, we're in a vehicle, we're in a body, we're in, and that's part of who we are in the sense that it carries us around. But I mean, who we are, our heart, our identity comes from God, and I think that knowing the source is pretty critical, to knowing who we are.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And I think about, it is what defines us,
Yes.
Who gives our life meaning. I was saying earlier, right, as we were conversing earlier, I was saying that I didn't always know that I had an identity in Christ, because there are some times that we go through things in life and they give us identity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We become a bitter person. I identify with pain. I identify, with embarrassment. I identify with low self-esteem. I identify with those things. And so it becomes a part of our identity. But when I think of identity as well, I think about, God being the vine dresser and we are the branches. Like, we are a part of him, where you just talked about agreement. So when God says that we are something, we come into agreement with that.
Yes.
But there are times that we detach ourselves because we feel like we are not who he's calling us to be. So there's that tug of war, right? Sometimes we're trying to figure things out. God says you are, we say, I'm not.
Yeah, or I'm not yet. And it's interesting that agreeing with who we already are, even before we don't step into the fullness of that, and we're walking along that way, is really important, because that's really the vision. That's the vision that's set before us. We kind of enter the world like a seed, and everything that's already within us is how we're going to bloom into the fullness of who we are. But getting there is the vision of that fullness and the vision of the wholeness of who we are. That's what pulls us. That's what draws us, and that's what encourages us to keep moving, agreeing with the fullness of who we are, who God says we are. But that's really important, what you said about what defines us. And there's so many things. I know a lot of ladies, when we did the polling question, a lot of ladies weighed in on that. And, when it comes to things that define us, there's so many things that we could define ourselves by. And like you were talking about, and seeing ourselves through different lenses based on life experiences, based on all of the factors. And there's so many factors in life that shape us. And they're all important. They're all important as far as our journey is concerned, but none of them define us. And we run into a lot of blockages and a lot of challenges and a lot of hurdles in walking out in the truth of who we are, when we see ourselves through a lens of pain, or a lens of trauma, or a lens of names and labels that other people have always put on us, or behaviors of others that we were subject to.
Yes.
Like rejection. If you perceive yourself always through a lens of rejection, it'll alter how you behave when you enter a room. Absolutely. You can just assume on the front end that people are going to reject you, and you might go one of two ways. You might go out of your way to people please and go above and beyond so that people will receive you, or the opposite. Might go in really hard, and I'm going to reject you before you reject me. And so there's so many things, about identity, and we have to be careful that we're not looking through the lens of things that just happen to us, experiences that happen to us.
Right. And you said something that was so key at the beginning of everything you were saying. You said everything comes in a seed form. And sometimes we don't know what that seed is going to become. So it's hard for us to get into the agreement of what God says, because we already, in a sense, have like this fully grown tree, from everything else that we experienced. So when God gives us a seed form and he says, this is who you're going to become, we don't see it. So we know what the tree that we have in our life already and what it is bringing us, even though it may not be nourishing. That's the part with in our mind that plays the trick on us. Like, I know this demon.
Yes.
I know this experience. I know this situation. So I don't know what is to come. So I don't want to have to nourish something else because I don't know if it's going to bring hardship. I don't know if it's going to bring disappointment. I don't know. And so therefore, in life, sometimes people just continue to identify with one thing, because if I leave that and start something new, what is going to be in the new place? So it is that agreement now with God to be able to say, I identify with this, but old things now are passing away and God wants to give me something new. So now I have to trust him. That is a big thing. Being able to trust that God has our best interest when he is truly washing us and cleansing us and allowing us to see ourselves as the beauty that he sees us in, the identity that he actually shaped and molded us in.
Yes, absolutely. I think that what you were just touching on about stepping out into those places that are going to require something uncomfortable and unfamiliar. I think there's something really huge to be said about safety. And I think that this is where women can really champion other women. I think it's just critical to be able to help one another feel safe to show up as our authentic self. And one thing that I have discovered just as, a mom, because a lot of us don't necessarily grow up in a family of origin where, you're safe to express your heart the way you express your heart, think the way you think, feel the way that you feel. And, what's interesting about safety is that when we create spaces for people to show up and be safe and be their authentic self, the more that safety shapes us so that in the future, we're actually able, it conditions us to feel safe in being authentic, that when you're conditioned by that, and you show up in spaces where it actually isn't safe to be authentic, you'll have the boldness and you'll have the courage.
That's good.
To be authentic, because you've had the experience of being able to step out in that way, and we make room for one another to do that. We champion one another to do that and encourage one another to do that. But I think honestly, I think we need to get real. I just think we need to have a lot of hard conversations. We need to have a lot of hard conversations, even in how we show up. I don't know how you want to break this down. So I think I want to kind of defer to you, even with some of the responses, some of the things with the questions.
And that's where I was really and I actually was going to go into the question. So I wanted to get the whole identity aspect out there so that we can go into the questions, because right there, when you just talked about having that safe space and being able to be your authentic self, one of the responses just came to mind, because there are times that we don't feel safe. And so we do not put forth that authenticity because we don't know if we can be that way. But being in those safe spaces allows us to be our authentic self at all times.
Yes.
Even if it's not received. Right?
That right there is real. What you just said is really important, because we need to be able to show up with the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Absolutely.
And we need to be able to be seen. There's a difference between feeling seen and actually being seen, and being known and being loved. And we need to feel seen, and we need to feel safe, and we're going to be conditioned by that in how we actually show up, in life. And I think sometimes we show up in a lot of the roles that we have, and if we can't bring it all to the table and just be real and let our whole self be seen. I mean, there's people have different levels of access to our lives. You know, there's different levels of intimacy. There's different boundaries that we have. There's even boundaries that come with some of the roles, you know, that we have and everything. But I think that being able to show up in each one of those things authentically, you know, and I don't mean hanging out all your, you know, your dirty laundry, you know, like I said, we have different levels of intimacy and people have different levels of access to our hearts. But I think that just being able to show up, you know, and people extending grace to one another and having honor for another person.
Absolutely. And with that, where you said, and there's different levels, but being safe to at least express what your truth is.
Yes.
Right? Because if we're not able to be ourselves in certain places, then it can actually lead to traumas.
Yes. Yeah,
right?
It almost always does.
Right. It leads to these different traumas where now we have to process, why am I not able to be that? Then insecurities can come. It's so many, and you know, the enemy will capitalize on anything that he can capitalize on, right?
Yes.
So I believe that that is something that whether we are received or not, we have to be able, like Jesus himself, he was not always received, but he remained himself. Right?
Yes, he did.
He was meek. It wasn't as if he was like, hey, I'm tearing everybody up and hey, I'm gonna just tell you a piece of my mind. No, but you're being yourself authentically.
Yeah, one thing that you just said that's super important is that roles were always fluid and secondary to Jesus. Jesus was always fluid concerning roles. He wasn't rigid about roles. If he was, then he would have been fitting rigidly into the stereotypes that everyone was trying to project on him, you know, like as a rabbi, as a friend, as a son, whatever it is, you know, but roles are very fluid and secondary. But the one thing that Jesus was never, that he was just unshakable on, and he was rigid about, was identity.
Yeah.
His own and the identity of those around him. That's where you never see Jesus treat that with fluidity, because it's absolutely essential. It's like the core of who we are. It's the core of who he is, our identity.
Absolutely. And we're going to deep dive into that because we had about 7 responses concerning how does a woman break free from the limiting aspects of her roles / labels and step into the identity of who she is. Now, there was some that say, hey, you can't separate yourself from your role. You know, identity and role is the same. And I understand that part. But as I started thinking about that question, as God even allowed me to present it, was that there are times that, you know, we may not function in a particular role, but do we know who we are? What is our identity? Our role does not establish our identity.
Right. Because a role is a function.
Yeah.
A role is a function of our identity, and it's like an expression of our identity. But the funny thing about roles is we can lose a role at any given time. I mean, look at things that went on during COVID. I mean, people suddenly working at home, and you just lost that entire workplace dynamic. And maybe there was a hierarchy, and maybe you were the big chief and you were in charge and everything. And now you're home in your PJs sitting behind your laptop, and your role just changed drastically, you know, in a day, you know, like when the lockdowns hit and things like that. And, you know, even in some of the most gut-wrenching circumstances of life, I mean, you can have a role as a mother, and that is such a deep and that is such a big expression, you know, of our identity because of what we impart to our kids and how we love them and nurture them and raise them up. But I have known moms who have lost their children, you know, and I mean, talk about a role being lost.
Yeah.
in a moment's notice. And it's gut wrenching, it's heart wrenching. And yet, even on the other side of that, because you lose a role, even if it's the most honorable role of a lifetime in your heart, you haven't lost your identity.
Right.
You haven't lost the core of who you are. You don't cease to be because a role that you have ceases to be.
Absolutely. And just like I said, being transparent, and that is exactly, a part of our 5-point structure. But for me, I hid behind my roles, right? I hid behind my role as a wife. I hid behind my role as a mother. I hid behind my role, as a leader, but I was still struggling in my identity. Right. And
Yeah.
sometimes we hide behind roles when we don't, again, want to identify or come into agreement with certain things. That word agreement, Michelle, is like really sticking out, because I believe for many years, like God, it doesn't just go from one day to the next. Sometimes with identity, you can struggle with that. We're in a time now, and not to have to, put it in black and white, but a lot of people are struggling with their identity. Who am I?
Big time.
Who was I born to be? The world tells us who we are.
Yes.
Social media tells us who we are, and that's not to be.
No.
And so we are struggling. And when I say we, I'm talking about humanity, mankind. We're struggling with our identity because we have not come into agreement with who God says we truly are. Because everyone said you could be whoever you want to be. Right?
Yeah.
You can be whoever you want to be. I want to, because we are on this question, I want to share what one of the responses said. They said, to the question, how does a woman break free from the limiting aspects of her roles or labels and step into the identity of who she is? Their response was, that's a lot to unpack.
Yes.
They said, I think we break free when we label ourselves. They said, I think we break free when we label ourselves and not allow others to do it for us. Being comfortable and accepting the labels I give myself and more acceptable to me than the ones that others put on me. So that is the way that the power to form my identity lies with me.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement. I give that a hearty amen. And I would even
that was good.
It was excellent. Yeah. And I would even take that to the next point of agreement. If I'm looking through the lens of the source of life, if I'm looking through God's lens and I'm looking through his eyes at who he says I am, then I get to take that and put that on me, because if this person is coming from, a place of wholeness. It sounds like this is coming from a place of wholeness, but if we're not in a place of wholeness, we even have to be careful about the labels that we put on ourselves.
This is true.
But this is a powerful statement that I wholeheartedly agree with, because I think that's where it's so important that women find their voice, because there's so many voices around us that are trying to inform us about who we are. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, when it doesn't resonate, do we speak up, or do we even internally just say, no, that's not me. I don't really lay hold of that. That's not really mine. I don't agree with that, about who I am.
And I think even with that, and we don't always, where we again talked about the truth, right? And being able to be our authentic self, that if someone tries to put a label on us, to be able to say, that's not me, right then and there.
Right then and there.
Our silence is an agreement.
Yes.
Right? It's nothing wrong to say, that's not me, or you're misreading that. right? That's not who I identify with. It's okay to say that, because I do believe that words also have power.
They do. They have a lot of power.
Right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I thought that statement was, really good, because you're taking away the power that someone else is now placing upon you to say you're A, B, and C, but I'm going to break free of those limiting, parts of who you think I am and what
Yes.
you think I am supposed to do. Because someone can say, like, your relationship with your children can be different than my relationship with my children. But someone can say, as a mother, you should be doing A, B, and C.
Big difference.
It's a big difference.
Yeah.
So people could look at your role and say, well, because you carry this role, this is what you're supposed to be doing. The same thing when it comes to our relationship with God, and the responsibilities that he gives us in our role can look different than the next person that have a role that maybe look like the same role that I have.
Yes.
But the responsibility can be different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's super important to be able to celebrate and really radically acknowledge and radically accept how different we all really are. And how each person, each woman carries such a unique color, a unique shape. It's like when the light of God shines through you, it is its own color. There is no other color that's coming through who you are through another person. Same with me, same with every woman. It's like, and I think that it's so important that we acknowledge and appreciate, our differences and celebrate them, because I don't, like, my motherhood doesn't have to look like your motherhood. And there's things about your motherhood that I can absolutely celebrate. And there's things about it that can even, inform me, help me, encourage me.
Right.
There are areas where I could be, called higher,
Right.
areas where there's wisdom coming from your life and it's blessing me, but there's, I just think that people need the freedom to be who they are and be celebrated in that. Can you imagine if every one of our friends was exactly the same and they were all like us, just cookie cutter copycats?
Absolutely.
Of who, I'd go crazy. I could, I can't.
Right. But I feel the need to just, speak about this just for a moment. And this is actually, one of our episodes that we're going to just, even talk about that cookie cut. But I think that's why we really don't want to operate in our authenticity, because we are looked at as having to be a certain way.
Yes.
Especially if you are a Christian. How many times have we heard the saying, whether it was to us or to someone else in our hearing, oh, you're supposed to be a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're supposed to do this. And so automatically it becomes general, and it's as if we are suppressed to what you're supposed to do.
Yes.
So we don't live in the freedom that God has given us, because there are so many limitations out there to say, you're supposed to be doing this, you're supposed to be doing that. But you're like, wait, the voice of God spoke to me that I'm supposed to be doing this. But everyone has a conception in thought as to how things ought to be.
Yes. Yeah, they really do. And breaking free from those conceptions is huge. And I think Jesus did it in a time and a culture where, turning everything upside down. He was just controversial. He was controversial just from walking in the truth of who he was. And you look at everything that he was doing. Mm-hmm. He was, healing and making people whole and setting people free. And yet he was being blasted and criticized and persecuted and judged nonstop because he wasn't fitting into, the ideas of these cookie cutter boxes of what you're supposed to look like if you're a rabbi, what you're supposed to look like if you're a Jew, what you're supposed to look like if you're a man, and how you're, and a Jewish man, and how you're relating to women, and how you're relating to, the sinners, the tax collectors, the wine bibbers, and it's like, he was just authentically himself, unapologetically, himself. And that's the freedom, that's the freedom that we need to embrace, and the kind of freedom that we need to walk in. And I think that honestly, as sisters for one another, being able to make space and celebrate each other, walking in that kind of freedom, it builds courage, in people to be able to do that more and more and show up authentically. And there was something that you just said a minute ago, is that, just about expectations. Think about when kids are playing with toys, and it's like, if a Barbie has a broken leg off, and there's the Barbie has one leg, and you have like 4 Barbies lined up, and one of the Barbies has one leg. It's like, what, there's 3 kids. Which 3 Barbies are they picking up? They're probably picking up the 3 Barbies that have both legs, because there's just an expectation of what this, of what this should look like. And I think that's a big thing. I think that even sometimes when we show up in our roles, even at the workplace, I think sometimes people feel, pressure to, it can be hard. A lot of people in a leadership role want to be taken seriously, and it's like, oh, if I'm vulnerable, if I show any of my weakness, if I show any of my struggle, people might also assign that, to my ability, weakens my ability, to lead well, when really it doesn't, when being authentically ourselves really invites other people and even challenges other people, to be authentic, because it's freedom.
Yeah.
It's
and
so freeing.
And I think that is the time that we're in, Michelle, really, that God is calling us to break free from all of these limitations. Because, one thing for sure, even in leadership, and that was something that I've heard, oh, you're not supposed to, let the people see your weakness. No, you're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to. I mean, you see sometimes now, even in worship, where if you're going to minister, you don't engage in worship. You have to sit. I've always raised my hands. I always in the midst of worship.
Yep.
I will cry. I will lay out, because it's not a performance, right?
No.
I'm not going to perform for anyone to be a certain way, because, if God is the one that I'm serving, he is going to teach me how to serve.
Yes.
He's going to teach me how to live. When we say Holy Spirit lives within us, he guides us, he leads us, he knows what the expectations are. So therefore, the limits that I had for myself, I said, I have to break free from this. Like the coat that was tied up, like, set me free.
Set me free. Yes, that's it right there.
Set me free, so with that, someone says here, that was good. Our authenticity challenges people. It does. Because once people realize that you're no longer in a place of limitations, that challenges them as to even how they interact with you.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Right?
I also think that the freedom in it is attractive. You know what I mean? When someone's just authentically being themselves, and when they're just, they're showing up with all of themselves, it's like, it's freeing, it allows you to relax, you take a completely different heart posture, and it just allows you to simply relax, into who you are. And you don't have to, it's funny. We're all at different levels of healing, in our lives, moving through things. Everyone has a story. You can show up on any given day and encounter another person, and whatever role they have in relationship to you, it's like, you could be going through such a wonderful, amazing season of your life. That person could be going through the darkest season of their soul, and we don't know. And I mean, I think that when we just take time, I think vulnerability and being authentic, it just puts other people at ease, and it creates a safety. Like when we're vulnerable with other people, and when we are quick to listen and slow to speak, and we're actually interested and we care about hearing their heart, getting to know them a little bit more, everything changes. You see a person's demeanor, and expression and countenance and even body language, everything softens.
Absolutely.
Everything relaxes. And it's like, isn't that so much more freeing and so much more peaceful to be able to do life that way, with each other and still be able to show up? I mean, our roles, so many things are related to our giftings, and our skill sets and our anointings, and all of those things people can do even without bringing their real character to the table,
Right.
their real integrity to the table, their heart to the table. They can really do a lot of these things, well, but that doesn't mean, that they're showing up in the fullness of who they are. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we really desire? Like, aren't we desiring connection? Aren't we desiring to be seen and known and loved?
Absolutely.
Like what is really the point, of the whole human journey here? Do we want to connect with God? Do we want to connect with the source of life, the source of creation, the source of all things, the source of our identity, and be able to embrace that, agree with that, and really encourage and champion others to embrace that and agree with that about who they are, and then really be able to to celebrate that and to enjoy it. I mean, to honestly, to enjoy another person for who they are and have grace for all of the parts that aren't fully matured, all of the parts that aren't fully healed. There's just, can I show up to, if I feel like, if I'm in a place in my life where I feel like a half-eaten apple or half-eaten piece of fruit, it's like, do I have to show up in every role and show, you hold a piece of half-eaten fruit up to the light at a certain angle, and you're going to see that shiny whole side and not see the eaten side,
That's right.
And it's like, is that the side that you just want to you have to hold and be rigid to show everybody that side? Or can you just turn yourself? Can you just be fully who you are, show up who you are?
Absolutely.
And you know what, like you said before, Annette, and it's so important, it's so critical. We're not always going to be received. We're not always going to be, accepted. People aren't always going to care, about receiving us or accepting us. And that's okay.
And I love, we are healed, but healing.
Yes.
About that, and sometimes, again, and I know that it seems like I'm staying in this area because I believe that this is an area that we stayed in. God has healed us, like we said, that seed, and God knows the fullness of that seed maturing and germinating, right? But we don't go through the process of understanding that, listen, yes, God gave me the identity that I'm healed, that I'm whole, that I'm free. But we have experience certain things in our life that we are healing through. And it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be transparent. It's okay to say, listen, I am working through this and I am coming out of this. When we truly know who God is in our life, we're able to say, he's surrounding me.
Yes.
Even if I'm, like you said, that half-eaten piece of fruit, that if I have to turn it and show that, I know that God is surrounding all of this because he's going to use it possibly to allow somebody else to show that part of themselves.
Yes, come on.
Right? God wants us, we say that we are helpers one of another. Even the weaker part of his body is necessary, but nobody want to be weak.
That's it. That's it.
No one wants to show that weakness so that we can get stronger. Imagine if we had I was about to say a physical therapist, but a trainer, right, in the gym. Say we had a trainer and they are to help us to strengthen our weaker parts, but we don't want to tell them, okay, I want to work on this because when I try to lift up, a 5-pound bag of rice, my arm is like a noodle. You don't want to tell them because you want to keep up an appearance that everything is fine, but let us, like you said, help one another, champion one another. Girl, you can do this, that we can be vulnerable with each other and help each other get to where we need to be in the
Yes. Yes. And something you just said that I thought I kind of wanted to key in on there was how you were said, we are healed and we are healing.
Mm-hmm.
And just the importance of, giving ourselves permission to embrace that process. Because I remember asking the Lord one time about the scripture, working out our salvation
That's good.
with fear and trembling. And working out our salvation, like I wanted a picture of what does that look like? Because what is salvation?
Mm-hmm.
It's sozo in the Greek, and it's our freedom, it's our healing, it's our deliverance through him. So how do we work that out? And just the picture that he gave me was just a lump of dough and red food coloring, a couple of dots of red food coloring in the dough, and just how we're partners in that process. It's like his hands overlay ours, and we are working our salvation through the dough. It's ultimately, it comes from him. That did not come from us. He dropped the drips, you know what I mean, right down into there. And it's like, we're needing that dough, because that's how we partner. Like, that's how we partner with God, in the process of working out healing, working out our freedom, working out our deliverance, like into all of those untouched parts, or those ugly parts, or those parched parts that just haven't had the water, of his presence, haven't had the water of his word and his healing. There are places in us that are just painful. And sometimes we want to compartmentalize, and we want to put this pain or that pain in that pain room and shut the door and lock it. And I'll come back to that another time. I got to go do this. And I have this room, the pain room. And it's like, no, it's like, I actually have to go and open that door and enter that room. Yeah. But I get to enter it with God. It's like, if I enter that room on my own, there's some rooms of pain that we can enter on our own, and it will take us out. It's like, it's just not a good idea. Don't go in that room alone.
I know that's the truth. And that's why I say, whenever you have to go back into anything, even in your past, make sure you have God with you, because he is your protector. He's going to keep you safe, when you are experiencing those things. But there was something, again, that someone had put in response to the questions that we were given. And they were talking about, and this right here, when we were talking about, just being able to champion each other. And they were talking about perceiving things, right? People can only perceive things on a much deeper level of understanding others when it comes to their level of experience. It says that can increase empathy, compassion, and listening skills to see things in a deeper way rather than a shallow way. And so this is us being able to imagine ourselves in the condition that someone else may be going through.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And it's not necessarily that we are walking in their shoes, but what they're going through. Can we, be empathetic towards that, to understand on a deeper level? And many times through listening, through being that listening ear and not necessarily responding. Yeah, some people just need to get out what they're going through, right?
Yeah, and some never even get that opportunity, and when that opportunity comes, it's like a dam breaking. It's like a dam breaking and like a river pouring forth, and it's like that is how people get free. And that's how people even just give themselves permission. I mean, I think perception, this is such a big topic to unpack, that my heart and my mind are going in so many different, directions. But we had a few comments about, perception. And I think that's huge, because even in relation to persona, whenever you think of people, managing their image, whether it's a celebrity, a politician, just some famous person, it's like, and people are paid all kinds of money, even to help them manage their image and everything like that. And it's a persona. It's actually not their person. Mm-hmm. It's a persona, yeah. And I think that sometimes, even with our, celebrity drenched culture, and, just, we have a very me culture, and a self-absorbed kind of culture. And I think that, sometimes that even, can inform, how we try to portray ourselves. And honestly, it's it's not worth the effort. I think that a lot of people grow really tired. I think they grow really tired with trying to help other people perceive them in a certain light, because that gets exhausting. That really gets exhausting. That's like the Lord says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Yeah. So if his yoke, if the yoke that's on me isn't easy and the burden isn't light, it's like, what am I carrying that's not from God? What am I putting on myself, that's not from God? Like how am I trying to, portray anything, not, even a circumstance or anything? I mean, in a way that's going to just tire me out, like we're called to lay aside every weight. We're really supposed to be being able to walk with a peace that brings just a levity and a lightness to our lives so that we can actually experience joy, joy in who we are, joy in who you are, who the people in our lives are. Be able to have joy about actually who we are so that we can actually live our lives in the fullness of who we are and have joy in the process. Because there's enough things already that make life heavy and that weigh us down. Are we going to get to the end of our lives and have all kinds of regret that we just didn't get to show up in the moment being truly who we are?
Absolutely. And I have a question here. I know we're almost coming to the hour, and this is a question for those who are watching too. You can go ahead and put in the chat, but how many can identify their true identity apart from the roles that you are called to take on? How many of you can truly identify your true identity apart from the roles that you have been called to take on? And you talked about that, Michelle, that if you're no longer in that particular role, what do you do? Do you feel lost? Do you feel like you don't have a purpose? Do you feel like, God, did you make a mistake in this? Like, who am I? Because that's where it really comes down to. And I think a lot of people in life don't know what their purpose is.
Yeah.
Who am I? Who have I been called to be? And that is the innate, the inward part, as opposed to everything else that's attached to you.
Yes.
There are some who believe that you are your role. What do you say about that, Michelle? Some people feel like that they are their role, that if God called me to this, right? If God called me, let's just say, to be a pastor, God called me to be a leader, and I am a child of God, my identity and my role are one and the same.
No. I mean, I don't agree with that at all, only because, I mean, I understand where, that frame of mind comes from. And I think that's also a message, honestly, that's like drilled into us, like from birth, that even that we, that we are what we do, only what we do, what we say, or the roles that we fill. But a role is a function, and a title. We had some ladies really weigh in on that with titles, and a title is a description of a function. If you're a pastor, you're shepherding the hearts of people, and the title, pastor, just means shepherd, and it's describing the function that you shepherd the hearts of people. Absolutely. But at any given point in time, because we can lose a role doesn't mean that we lose our relevance. It doesn't mean that we lose our identity. I mean, look at all the roles that Jesus had when he walked his earthly life. All of those roles completely switched after the resurrection. He was no longer walking in those earthly roles in any one of those capacities. Once he actually ascended to heaven, he's seated at the right hand of God. He's no longer walking with human skin on down here. And it's like all of those roles are gone, but they're not lost.
Right.
And there's legacy, and there's wisdom, and there's things to be learned, from our roles, but our roles are essentially functions and expressions of who we are. They're not the core of who we are. The question that you posed is key.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's something people should really take before God too, and ask, who am I apart from all of these roles that I have and all of these hats that I wear?
Right. Absolutely. And that's the key question. But I definitely concur with that as far as the functions, but it doesn't make us who we are. It
Right.
is something that we are doing, right? As opposed to who we are, right?
Yes.
Yes, I may be a mother, and someone else had posed that here, and it was very simple. They said, I used to think I confused my identity with being a mama.
Mm.
I confused who I was with being a wife. I confused myself with that because that's what we have been taught. What do you want to be when you grow up? You want to be this? Okay, well, this is what you're going to identify with. But if we didn't have those things, you think about it, some can start off in one area and end up in another. You just use the big example, Jesus Christ. He started off in one thing, interchanged here. It didn't mean that it was insignificant. And I think possibly that's the way that it's viewed, as if it's insignificant and it's no good or with no use. No, but I think God wants us to get in tune and agreement with who we really are as an individual. And when we become that, because here's the thing, what we just talked about, when we feel as if, we are the role and people begin to label a role, we will not step out to be our authentic self.
That's true.
In the identity that God has given us, because we've limited ourselves to a role.
Yeah, absolutely. It becomes a limitation. If a role is equated with identity, then it becomes essentially a lid on our identity. Because it's like, well, it's like when I even encourage the women, I think it's important to encourage each other to actually take the hat off, step out into a place that's, less familiar, and because what you just shared, I think is something that's every woman on some level can relate to, and I think that the roles that tend to consume the most amount of our time and energy are the ones that can often feel like the ones that are defining us, but they're not defining us, because once upon a time, I didn't even have those roles. When I was born into this world and I was a little baby and I grew up as a child and I was a teenager, I didn't have this role as a mom. You didn't have that role as pastor. There were so many roles we didn't even have yet, but we didn't cease to be. We didn't cease to have an identity, but we matured in who we were. And those roles became, expressions and functions, of our identity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, identity defines who we are. What we do not define us. It is who we are. There was one last thing that I wanted to say, and I wrote this here because of the versus aspect. When I looked at identity versus the roles of women, it's how we're looking at versus, right? Are we looking at it in a complimenting way? That's okay, the identity versus the roles, that they're working hand in hand. I mean, they work hand in hand, but again, one does not go over, well, the roles does not go over who we are. It is the function of what it is that we do. Or are we looking at it in a contradictory way, where I believe that again, what we have been taught can look at it in a contradictory way, that identity is really bashing the roles that I have. But no, I'm doing these things for God, so they're one and the same. No, we're not bashing one over the other. It's just knowing what's what.
Yes.
The identity is who we are, and the roles are the functions in which we have to do what it is that God has called us to do. Because if we don't have the role, does that mean we are not who we are? So we have to find out who we are in God, so that we can now, work together with the role, but not say I am because of the role.
Yes. I think a picture that I get when you share that is of a campfire, and it's giving off light, it's giving off heat and warmth, but that's not the fire itself. I'm warm near it. I'm getting light from it. And that's what it's giving off. You know what I mean? That's what I'm receiving from it. But it's not the fire itself, and the person that you are, you're giving off who you are through all of these expressions in all of these roles and all of these, and the hats that we wear in life, we have so many of them. But I think that the other thing that's really kind of dangerous, like sometimes is that what happens when seasons change, and what happens when the Lord leads us into a completely new, unfamiliar leg of the journey, that doesn't look anything like what came before it. Can we just can we forsake that if he calls us to lay it down? Can we let go of a role and understand that we're not letting go of our identity? Because we age, we move through seasons, we grow, we mature, new things come our way. And if the Lord is asking us to step into something, it's like, will he still have my yes if I have to relinquish a role and I have to die to a role, or I have to take a hat off because it no longer serves the purposes that God has for me in my life? And am I going to be willing to say yes to that? Or is it so entangled with my identity that I can't separate the two? Because I shouldn't feel defined by my role. It's like I should feel defined by the source of my identity, and that's the Lord, and what I draw from him. And like that one statement said, then what I put on myself, my own power of agreement, my own voice coming into agreement with the truth of who I am and whose I am.
Absolutely. That's good in a nutshell, Michelle.
Can I just say, Annette, this was tough. I feel like we were kind of priming the pump, and I just like, I want to go so many places with this, and I'm like,
we need to do another segment at another time, because there is so much that we did not unpack here. There is so much, and I want to be able, because we got some great responses here.
We did.
Right? As to how people view the question, especially the question when it came to, and this may be its own episode, right? I think this will be its own episode. Why do people misinterpret who someone is with what someone does? And the way that they took this question, it was like, hey, the way that people act, the way that people show up, and, how they behave. And so this is how they are. And some people perceive them to be a certain person, and that may not be who they actually are. They took it at a character base.
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
And so when I saw that is a whole episode within itself, Michelle, because I think the role of women versus the identity, it carries its own episode.
Yeah.
Do you believe? Because this right here, but we had almost 20 some odd responses to that question alone.
Yeah, to that question alone. Yeah, which was phenomenal. That was great.
So this lets you know that there is a lot of encounters that people are having with other individuals to say, hey, there's some character flaws here. And I'm seeing it in every place.
Yes. And that's something I just think that resonates with a lot of people. It's something that we encounter all the time. And it's something that we could really unpack. Yeah, for sure. People weighed in pretty heavy on that.
They weighed heavy. Yeah, so I was like, let me pose another question for our identity, right? And the roles, because they unpack that. So I hope everyone truly enjoyed tonight's episode. I just have a couple of announcements before we actually go off. I'm going to pop up here. So in our season 1 of Let's Spark Some Conversation, we have other guest hosts that is going to be joining us here. It is going to be every other Wednesday, the 1st, the 3rd, and then the 5th Wednesday of March and May. But on March the 15th, we are going to have Pastor Natalie. She is going to be my guest co-host in our episode 2. Is going to be about overcoming emotional barriers and experience true freedom. How many of you need to overcome some emotional barriers? I'm for sure some of you out there may put your hand up, or maybe you don't want to authentically, put your hand up, because we don't know who's out there. That's a whole nother thing right there, right? But please join us back here on Wednesday, March the 15th at 7 p.m., where I'm going to have Pastor Natalie as my guest co-host. And again, we're talking about overcoming emotional barriers and experiencing true freedom. So, Michelle, we got a whole bunch of people. I give my bye-byes, right? We are going to have 8 episodes within this season, and we have some great people that are going to come on and just truly be themselves, genuine, authentic. We're not posing to be scholars or anybody else that we're not. We are going to just come before you as God has, endowed us to, and have some conversation right in your midst, okay? So with that, Michelle, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I say this, and when you and I conversed, and you know how you just received me, and you shared with me what the Spirit of God had released to you, and there was literally like a weight that was lifted off of me. And so I said, my sister has to be the first guest co-host to be with me. And guess what, guys? She will be here as the last guest co-host of season 1. So you want to come back throughout the whole season, but you definitely want to come back May 31st, because she will be with us. So I'm going to say, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, my YouTube channel, which is at Annette Ramos 1, so that you don't miss any episodes. Not only are we doing this Let's Spark Some Conversation, but on a daily basis, I am providing declarations that God has given me just to, start your day, put a spark in your day, the things that God has declared over your life, and that you can truly walk in those declarations. All right. So again, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Share this video with your loved ones. We have it on YouTube. So everybody have YouTube connected to your phone. That's an app that is actually a part of your phone. All right. So share it with someone, bless someone. And I pray that you were blessed on tonight. So again, I love you all. Go forward, being victorious, being blessed, and being the overcomer that you are. All right. So you all have a good evening. God bless you.